The sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling fields of the plantation, its golden light stretching lazily across the rows of cotton. The air was heavy with humidity, carrying the earthy scent of freshly turned soil and the faint, acrid tang of smoke from distant chimneys. Life on the plantation followed a rhythm that was both predictable and merciless, a rhythm dictated by the wealth of the master and the labor of those who had no choice but to obey. Among these laborers were men, women, and children whose lives had been traded and auctioned, reduced to mere commodities in a world obsessed with profit and power. On this particular morning, the plantation master rode out in his polished carriage, his boots clicking against the wooden floorboards, the reins clutched tightly in his hands. He was a man known throughout the county for his sharp mind, ruthless ambition, and an uncanny ability to turn even the smallest opportunity into a fortune. He had seen a great deal in his years, land deals, rivalries, and the often brutal exchanges that occurred at the auction blocks. But what he did not know, what he could not have anticipated, was that today would present him with a transaction unlike any he had ever witnessed. At the heart of the county lay the marketplace, a sprawling area filled with the clamor of buyers and sellers. The sounds were almost deafening, the sharp cries of auctioneers, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, and the murmured negotiations that passed from lip to lip. There, beneath a canopy of worn wooden canvas, stood a group of young girls, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. Their dresses were tattered, their feet bare, and their hands clenched nervously. They were young, no more than 10 or 12, their innocence a stark contrast to the harsh reality surrounding them. Each one of them carried a story, a history that had been ripped away before they even had a chance to understand what it meant to be free. The master's eyes scanned the group, not with sympathy but with calculation. He was searching for something, though he could not have said precisely what it was. He knew the value of youth in the marketplace, the promise of strength, obedience, and the potential for labor that could last a lifetime. But among the children, one girl caught his attention. She stood slightly apart from the others, her posture erect despite the exhaustion and fear that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was dark and thick, falling in waves that framed a face far too mature for her years. Her eyes were sharp, almost unnervingly so, and there was a flicker of intelligence there, a spark that seemed to see through the crowd, through the bartering, and even through the hardened hearts of those who had come to exploit her. The auction began, and the cries of the auctioneer echoed across the marketplace, punctuated by the rising bids of eager buyers. Each name called, each hammer struck, felt like a death sentence to the children being sold. The girl the master had noticed was up next. The auctioneer's voice boomed, detailing her age, her health, and her supposed abilities. 19 cents, he announced, and the bidding began. The master watched quietly, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. It was absurd, almost laughable, that this girl, with the intelligence and presence she clearly carried, was being offered for less than the cost of a loaf of bread. But there was an undeniable thrill in the moment, a mixture of power and opportunity that he had come to expect from such exchanges. Other buyers hesitated, some shaking their heads at the audacity of such a low price. Yet, as the bids failed to rise, the master's decision became clear. He raised his hand, signaling his intent, and with a firm nod to the auctioneer, he secured the girl for the inconceivable sum of 19 cents. A hush seemed to fall over the crowd as the transaction was finalized. The master approached the girl, who looked up at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Her small hands trembled, and she avoided direct eye contact, yet the flicker of intelligence in her gaze remained unbroken. The master, in that moment, recognized that he had acquired not just a child, but a potential, a presence that could shift the dynamic of his plantation in ways he could not yet imagine. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving behind the whispers of disbelief. How could someone so young, so seemingly powerless, be bought for less than a penny in a world where human lives were measured in dollars and cents? As they made their way back to the plantation, the girl remained silent, her mind, no doubt, racing with fear, questions, and the uncertainty of what awaited her. The master, meanwhile, could not shake the feeling that this acquisition was different. He had purchased countless slaves before, each transaction a simple exchange of money for labor, Yet something about this girl unsettled him. There was a weight in her eyes, a sense that beneath her small frame lay a story that had been hidden, perhaps deliberately, from those who sought to exploit her. The carriage rattled over the uneven road, dust rising in clouds around the wheels, and the master found himself stealing glances at his new acquisition. There was an almost imperceptible air of confidence in her demeanor, despite the circumstances. He wondered briefly about her family, her past, and what secrets she might be keeping. In his experience, children at the market were often forgotten, dismissed, or undervalued, yet this girl carried an aura that defied such assessments. Arriving at the plantation, the girl was introduced to the sprawling estate that would now be her home. The buildings were grand, the fields expansive, and the servants cautious in their approach to someone new. She was assigned to quarters, a small room with bare furnishings, yet it was cleaner and more orderly than many others on the estate. As the master watched her settle in, he could not help but feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. He had acquired her for almost nothing, yet there was a sense that her value could far exceed the paltry sum he had paid. The days that followed were quiet but tense. The girl moved among the other workers with a careful grace, observing, learning, and adapting. The master continued to watch her, noting her intelligence, her quick understanding of tasks, and the way she seemed to command attention without speaking. It became increasingly clear that she was no ordinary child. There was a depth to her presence, a sense of history and lineage that suggested a connection to something far greater than the field she now toiled in. In the evenings, the master would sit by his study window, watching the girl from a distance. He pondered the odds, the unlikely circumstances that had brought her into his possession for the absurdly low price of 19 cents. He considered the marketplace, the other buyers who had overlooked her, and the hidden potential that now rested under his roof. There was a story waiting to be uncovered, a secret that had been carefully concealed, and he felt an insatiable curiosity to learn what it was. It was a transaction that, on the surface, appeared insignificant, almost laughable in its simplicity. Yet the more he observed her, the more he realized that this seemingly trivial purchase might alter the course of his plantation, and perhaps even the lives of everyone connected to it. 19 cents had never felt more valuable. And so the stage was set. The plantation master had acquired a child, a girl whose presence promised to unravel mysteries he could not yet comprehend. The fields of cotton stretched endlessly into the horizon, yet beyond them lay a story waiting to unfold, a story of hidden connections, of lineage and inheritance, of secrets buried beneath layers of history and human ambition. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the estate, and in that light the master felt the first stirrings of a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about power, possession, and the human heart. The young girl, now a part of the sprawling plantation, moved through her new life with a careful blend of observation and quiet resilience. Every sound, every gesture, and every glance carried meaning for her, for she had learned early that the world was unkind to those who failed to notice its subtleties. The other children, some older, some younger, whispered and watched her with a mixture of curiosity and envy. They had lived their short lives under the weight of ownership, yet even they could sense that she was different. There was a presence about her that demanded attention without effort, an awareness that set her apart from the others. Her days began before the sun had fully risen, the horizon still tinged with the soft purples and golds of dawn. The rhythm of labor was relentless. She swept the floors of the master's quarters, tended to the fields, and carried out tasks that required both strength and endurance. Yet, despite the fatigue that would have broken others, she moved with a quiet grace, her mind always alert, cataloguing, remembering, and learning. It was this combination of intelligence and resilience that drew the master's attention repeatedly. He watched her from a distance at first, noting the way she adapted, the way she seemed to read situations before they even unfolded. There was something almost uncanny about her ability to navigate the harsh environment of the plantation. Where others faltered, she anticipated, observed, and acted. A spilled bucket of water was swept up before it could cause a mess. A fallen tool was returned to its place with efficiency that surprised even the most seasoned workers. She listened when others spoke, not merely hearing their words but understanding the underlying intentions. It was as if she possessed a sixth sense, an innate understanding of human nature that belied her age and circumstances. Yet, for all her capability, there was a loneliness that clung to her like a shadow. The other children, bound by fear and habit, kept their distance. Friendships were a risk, a gamble in a world where trust could be deadly. And so she walked a delicate line, present but separate, participating yet detached, her mind constantly moving, constantly analyzing. She carried with her fragments of memories, whispers of a past that she could not fully articulate, yet which shaped the way she perceived the world. These remnants were pieces of a puzzle, pieces she did not yet understand, but which were waiting to reveal themselves. In the evenings, when the work was done, and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, she would find small moments of solitude. She would sit beneath a lone tree at the edge of the property, watching the sky change from gold to deep violet, listening to the distant sounds of the river as it wound its way through the landscape. In these moments she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the boundaries of the plantation, a life where her mind, her curiosity, and her talents could flourish without restraint. These were fleeting daydreams, fragile and delicate, yet they gave her strength, a quiet defiance that burned beneath the surface. The master, observing her from the porch of his estate, could not help but be intrigued. He had acquired countless workers over the years, yet few had left such a profound impression on him so quickly. There was a depth to her that demanded his attention, not a depth of obedience or utility, but a depth of spirit and intelligence that hinted at something extraordinary. He found himself wondering about her origins, about the circumstances that had brought her to the auction block for the astonishingly low price of 19 cents. There was a mystery there, a hidden narrative that called to him, one that he could not ignore. He began to test her in small ways, asking her questions that others would have found irrelevant or trivial. He watched her responses, not just for accuracy, but for nuance, for the way she processed the information, for the subtle intelligence in her eyes. She answered carefully, never revealing more than necessary, yet always with a precision that suggested a mind far beyond her years. It was a dance of observation and strategy, each learning from the other, each aware that there was a larger game at play, though neither fully understood it yet. As the weeks passed, her reputation among the other workers began to shift. Whispers followed her wherever she went, stories of her cleverness and foresight circulating quietly among the quarters. She remained polite and reserved, never boasting, yet her presence was undeniable. Even the older children, those who had lived the longest under the weight of oppression, recognized her uniqueness. Some looked upon her with awe, others with envy, and a few with suspicion, but all understood that she was different, and that difference carried both opportunity and danger. The girl herself was aware of the scrutiny. She had learned early that intelligence could be a shield but also a target. She chose her words carefully, her actions deliberately, never revealing the full extent of her abilities. She learned to anticipate the master's expectations, to exceed them without seeming to, and to navigate the delicate social hierarchies among the workers. Every glance, every gesture, every small interaction was an opportunity to learn, to observe, and to prepare. She was building a map of the world around her, one that extended far beyond the fields, the quarters, and the estate itself. There were moments, rare and precious, when she allowed herself to display glimpses of her true self. A clever solution to a problem, an unexpected insight into the operations of the plantation, a display of artistic skill or memory, these moments hinted at the depth of her capabilities. The master noticed them, of course, and they sparked a growing sense of fascination. He began to realize that the child he had purchased for virtually nothing might hold knowledge, skills, or connections, far beyond what any ordinary worker could possess. Her nights were filled with quiet reflection as she pieced together fragments of her past. She remembered faces, names, and fleeting interactions that now seemed to carry significance. There were stories whispered to her as a child, hints of family ties, of relationships that had been severed or obscured. These memories were incomplete, yet they formed a tapestry of identity that she clung to fiercely. In her heart, she felt the weight of a history she could not fully understand, yet which demanded recognition. It was this sense of connection, this hidden lineage, that gave her resilience, that informed her choices, and that set her apart from the others who had no such anchor. As the master continued his observations, he began to notice patterns. There was an intuitive understanding in the girl, a way of reading situations, of anticipating outcomes that could not be taught or forced. He began to wonder if she had been trained, if she had been guided by someone or something beyond the immediate circumstances of her life. Each interaction with her deepened his curiosity, creating a tension that was both thrilling and unnerving. He had acquired a worker, yet it was increasingly clear that he had also acquired a mystery, one that might unravel in ways he could not predict. The other workers, sensing the growing interest of the master, treated the girl with a mixture of caution and respect. They observed her closely, trying to discern the source of her unusual abilities. Some speculated that she came from a family of means or influence. Others believed she possessed an innate brilliance, a rare combination of intelligence and instinct. But none could fully explain her presence, and all recognized that she carried an air of significance that could not be ignored. The plantation itself became a stage for her quiet influence. Tasks were performed more efficiently in her presence. Conflicts among workers seemed to resolve themselves with subtle guidance, and even the master found his assumptions challenged by her insights. She was learning the ways of the estate, the rhythms of labor, the hidden dynamics of power, all while maintaining the careful balance of observation and discretion. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to test her abilities. Yet beneath all of this, there was a growing sense of anticipation, a feeling that something larger awaited. The girl could not yet articulate it fully, but there were moments when she felt the pull of destiny, the faint stirrings of a revelation that lay just beyond her reach. She was aware of a connection, a hidden link to a past she had not yet uncovered, and this awareness drove her forward, shaping her choices and guiding her actions. The master, too, felt the tension of anticipation. He had purchased the girl for 19 cents, expecting a simple exchange of labor, yet he had inadvertently acquired a presence that defied the ordinary. Each day revealed new layers, new capabilities, new hints of a hidden story that beckoned him toward discovery. He found himself increasingly invested, not just in her work, but in the unfolding mystery of who she was and what connections she carried. And so, life on the plantation continued, a delicate interplay of labor, observation, and quiet strategy. The girl moved through her world with a measured grace, learning, adapting, and surviving. The master watched, intrigued, challenged, and increasingly aware that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Each day brought new questions, new possibilities, and the faint, tantalizing sense that a revelation was approaching. A revelation that would forever alter the lives of everyone on the estate, in the midst of toil and discipline, in the quiet moments beneath the trees, and in the flickering shadows of the evening fires. The girl held within her a secret. A hidden connection that had yet to reveal itself. It was a secret tied to her lineage, to the unseen forces that had shaped her life, and to the invisible threads that connected her to a past far richer and more complex than anyone could have imagined. And though she did not yet know the full extent of her significance, it was this very hidden connection that would, in time, change the course of the plantation, the master, and the lives of all who labored under the weight of history. Days turned into weeks on the plantation, and the rhythm of labor continued, yet there was an unmistakable tension that had begun to settle over the estate. The young girl moved through her tasks with the same quiet precision, the same unshakable awareness. But the master could feel it. Something was stirring beneath the surface, a presence that refused to be ordinary. He had purchased her for a trivial sum, a mere 19 cents, expecting simplicity, compliance, perhaps even subservience. Yet the reality of her existence defied every expectation. Each day brought with it a new layer of intrigue, a new question demanding answers he could not yet articulate. It was during a routine inspection of the fields that the first hints of the extraordinary began to surface. The master had walked alongside the rows of cotton, counting workers, observing the efficiency of labor, when he noticed the girl standing apart from the others. She was arranging bundles with a meticulous precision that suggested more than mere diligence. There was method, strategy, even calculation in the way her hands moved. He watched her silently, curious, sensing that something about the patterns she followed was unusual, perhaps revealing a mind far more capable than any he had encountered. That evening, as the sun sank low into the horizon, painting the sky with molten gold and deep crimson, the master summoned her to the study. It was a room rarely entered by anyone but the household staff, filled with ledgers, papers, and the weighty air of authority. He closed the door behind her and observed her as she stood in quiet apprehension, hands folded neatly, eyes alert yet wary. There was a tension between them that neither fully acknowledged: curiosity and caution, intelligence and control, power and secrecy. He began with simple questions, the kind that would reveal obedience, but quickly found that her responses carried layers he had not anticipated. She answered with clarity, thoughtfulness, and subtle nuance, weaving information with insight, as if she understood the dynamics of the estate, the intentions of its master, and the invisible structures of influence that shaped life around her. Her knowledge extended beyond the practical. She spoke of people, of places, of history she could not possibly have known. Yet the master could sense the truth in her words, an authenticity that made him pause. It was as if she were connected to a world hidden beneath the surface, a world that he had never been taught to see. The first unmistakable discovery came by chance. The master had been reviewing a ledger of property transactions, tracing the lineage of the estate's previous owners, when he noticed a name that made his pulse quicken. A name familiar yet forgotten, linked not to any living occupant, but to a past that had been carefully erased from the official records. The girl, he realized, had an uncanny awareness of details that seemed to correspond with these names. He had dismissed her knowledge initially as coincidence, clever observation, perhaps even luck. But the ledger told a different story. There was a pattern, a connection between her presence and the obscure history of the land, one that he could not explain. Intrigued, he began to ask her more pointed questions. She listened carefully, her eyes alert but unreadable, as he queried her about people, places, and events that were far removed from her immediate experience. To his astonishment, she responded with accuracy, recalling details that no child should have known, referencing families, lineages, and incidents as if she had witnessed them firsthand. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a mosaic of hidden connections that hinted at a past deliberately obscured, a history waiting to be revealed. The tension on the plantation escalated subtly, like the hush before a storm. The other workers noticed the interactions, though they could not fully understand them. Whispers floated among the quarters, speculation and curiosity mingling with fear. The girl's position became increasingly enigmatic. No longer just a laborer, she was now a figure of subtle power, intelligence, and influence. The master observed her carefully, noting not only her knowledge, but the way others responded to her presence. There was respect, cautious curiosity, even awe. It was clear that she possessed authority, though it was quiet, unspoken, and derived from understanding rather than coercion. One evening, under the dim flicker of candlelight, the master found himself alone with her in the study, reviewing a collection of documents he had unearthed from the estate's archive. Papers yellowed with age, bound with string, some bearing official seals, others scribbled in hasty hand, held secrets long buried. As he read, he realized that some of the details aligned perfectly with the girl's earlier statements, the names she had mentioned, the places she had described, the circumstances she had alluded to. Each revelation tightened the coil of suspense, each coincidence becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. It was then that he discovered the first concrete proof of her hidden connection. Among the records was a ledger detailing inheritance and ownership, names of families long gone, debts transferred, properties exchanged, and most significantly, references to a young girl whose description matched her exactly. Her family, it seemed, had once held a position of influence, one deliberately. Why erased from the plantation's history? The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The girl he had purchased for 19 cents was not just another laborer, not just a child of circumstance. She was tied to a legacy, a lineage, a network of connections that had been intentionally obscured over time. The master's mind raced. The implications were staggering. He had expected labor, compliance, and perhaps the occasional curiosity of a child learning the ways of the estate. Instead, he had stumbled upon someone who embodied a forgotten history, whose presence carried significance far beyond the mundane concerns of cotton, fields, and household management. He considered the decisions that had led him to this moment, the auction, the trivial sum, the casual glance that had made him notice her among the other children, and marveled at the improbable chain of events that had placed her in his possession. The girl, for her part, seemed almost serene, though the master knew better than to underestimate her awareness. She had recognized the subtle shifts in attention, the careful study of her movements, the probing questions that hinted at his growing realization. Yet she revealed nothing outright. She allowed the discovery to unfold naturally, as though she understood that timing, patience, and observation were as powerful as any word or gesture. She was not a passive participant in the revelation. She was a silent architect, guiding it, allowing the master to come to the truth at his own pace. In the days that followed, the master continued to delve deeper into the records, piecing together fragments of history, cross-referencing names, dates, and events. Each document, each piece of correspondence, each ledger entry seemed to confirm the girl's remarkable awareness. She was a living repository of knowledge, a bridge between past and present, a thread that connected the visible world of the plantation to the invisible currents of history that had been carefully hidden. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had always prided himself on his understanding of wealth, property, and human nature, yet here was a presence that defied his comprehension, a reminder that the world contained mysteries far greater than any ledger or contract could capture. The unexpected discovery was not without its complications. The girl's hidden connection, once understood, could not remain a secret for long. The master recognized that it had the potential to disrupt the delicate hierarchies of the plantation, to challenge the assumptions of workers, overseers, and even neighboring landowners. The very knowledge she possessed carried power, and power, in the wrong hands, could be dangerous. He realized that he must tread carefully, balancing his curiosity with caution, his desire to understand with the need to protect both her and the fragile order of the estate. There were moments when the truth seemed tantalizingly close, just beyond reach. The girl wool. Mention a name, a place, a memory, and the master would feel the threads of the past tightening, drawing him toward a revelation that promised to reshape everything he thought he knew. The suspense was palpable, the anticipation almost unbearable. Every day became a careful negotiation, a dance of discovery and restraint, with the girl leading subtly, invisibly, guiding him toward the heart of her hidden connection. Then came the moment that changed everything. The master, poring over a set of letters bound with care, realized the magnitude of what he had uncovered. The girl's family, erased from official records, had once been integral to the social and economic fabric of the region. Her lineage included individuals of influence, foresight, and cunning. Her presence on the plantation was no accident, no random result of circumstance. She had been placed there, deliberately or inadvertently, to reclaim a history, to assert a connection that had been denied and suppressed. The implications were staggering. A child purchased for 19 cents held within her the key to a network of relationships, secrets, and power that could alter the very structure of the plantation and the legacy of those who had sought to erase her family from memory. The master's emotions were a tangled web of astonishment, fear, and admiration. He had begun with a simple transaction, expecting to gain labor, perhaps even control. Instead, he had discovered a hidden narrative, a secret that demanded recognition, and a presence that challenged every expectation he had ever held. The girl, for her part, remained composed, her quiet confidence a stark contrast to the tumultuous revelations she had triggered. She understood the power she held, yet wielded it with patience, precision, and the subtlety of one who had survived far greater challenges than mere labor or authority. And so the plantation existed in a state of quiet tension, a world of routine and labor overshadowed by a revelation that threatened to shift the balance of power, understanding, and history. The master, once confident in his dominion, now found himself navigating a landscape both familiar and entirely foreign, guided by a child whose knowledge, intelligence, and hidden connection defied all expectations. The discovery was complete, yet it was only the beginning. Beyond the fields, the quarters, and the estate itself, there lay a story waiting to unfold, a story that would reveal the full extent of her lineage, the depth of her awareness, and the extraordinary consequences of what had once seemed a simple, inconsequential purchase. The air in the master's study was thick with the scent of old paper, ink, and a faint trace of tobacco smoke. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the walls, making the room feel alive with secrets long hidden. The young girl stood quietly near the edge of the room, her hands folded, her eyes steady, watching the master as he sifted through a pile of ledgers, letters, and faded documents. Each piece of paper seemed mundane at first glance, yet together they formed a tapestry of history, lineage, and secrets that had been deliberately concealed for generations. The master, once confident in his understanding of the estate, now found himself overwhelmed by the depth of what he was discovering. Each letter he unfolded, each name he read, seemed to confirm what he had begun to suspect. The girl before him was far more than a laborer, far more than a child sold for 19 cents. She was connected to a lineage of power and influence, a family whose history had been intentionally erased, whose name had been deliberately stripped from official records, and whose legacy had been buried beneath layers of manipulation and deceit. As he read, the pieces began to fall into place. The documents told of a family that had once held considerable sway in the region, involved in commerce, governance, and property ownership. There were correspondences between prominent figures, financial records showing inheritance transfers, and mentions of children, including a young girl whose description matched the girl before him. The connections were unmistakable, the pattern undeniable. She was a descendant of people who had been written out of history, deliberately marginalized, yet their blood, their knowledge, and their claims lived on within her. The realization hit the master like a physical force. 19 cents. That was the price he had paid for a child who was, in truth, a living link to a legacy that should have commanded respect, wealth, and influence. The sheer improbability of the situation was staggering. A child, unnoticed by the world, discarded at an auction, now standing before him with quiet composure, held a connection that could shift the balance of power, question social hierarchies, and challenge assumptions about worth and inheritance. The girl, sensing the weight of the revelation, did not speak immediately. She allowed the master to piece together the information, to come to the truth on his own, as if understanding that the timing of such realizations was as important as the truth itself. Her gaze was steady, calm, and unwavering, a silent assertion that she was aware of her significance even if the world was not. She had lived long enough to understand that revelation could be as dangerous as it was empowering, and she exercised patience, letting the master navigate the complexity of his own discovery. As the evening stretched on, the master began to question everything he thought he knew. The plantation, once a simple microcosm of labor and authority, now seemed layered with hidden histories and unspoken connections. He considered the ramifications of what he had uncovered. The girl was not merely a worker, she was a guardian of a legacy that had been denied, suppressed, and almost forgotten. The power that her knowledge implied was subtle, invisible, yet potent. It had the potential to challenge the social order, to influence alliances, and to reframe the way the plantation, and perhaps the wider region, was understood. He called for the overseer, a man who had managed the estate with unquestioned authority for decades. When the overseer entered, the master did not immediately reveal the discovery. Instead, he observed, tested, and watched for reactions. The overseer, accustomed to absolute control, could sense the shift in power dynamics, but could not yet identify its source. The girl, aware of the subtle tension, moved with the grace of someone who understood both perception and consequence. She became a pivot, the fulcrum on which the balance of authority now rested. The following days were a careful dance of observation, interaction, and subtle maneuvering. The master began to involve the girl more actively in the management of the estate, asking her advice on organizational matters, decisions about resources, and even minor disputes among the workers. To his astonishment, her insight was consistently precise, her solutions practical, yet imbued with a deeper understanding that transcended mere efficiency. It was as if she could read the unspoken intentions of those around her, anticipate consequences, and navigate the complexities of human behavior with a sophistication far beyond her years. Then came the first undeniable confirmation of her lineage. Among the ledgers was a document of extraordinary importance, a handwritten will, carefully preserved yet obscure. By age and neglect. The will belonged to a member of her family, long presumed lost or erased, and it explicitly referenced her as the rightful heir to certain properties and assets. The master's hands trembled slightly as he read the words aloud, the implications crashing down like thunder. The girl, once invisible and overlooked, was legally connected to wealth, influence, and legacy that had been denied her through deliberate erasure. The gravity of the situation was not lost on either of them. The master realized that he had, unknowingly, become the custodian of a secret far greater than he could have imagined. The girl's connection was not simply historical, it carried immediate tangible significance. The properties, the claims, the ties to influential families, all of it lay before them, a hidden reality waiting to be acknowledged. And the girl, who had navigated her early life with quiet intelligence and resilience, now held the key to unlocking a past that the world had tried to conceal. For her part, the girl allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. It was a smile of recognition, not triumph, an acknowledgement that the truth was finally emerging. She had survived in a world that sought to define her by labor, obedience, and insignificance, and yet here she was, a living testament to history, lineage, and the resilience of memory. Her intelligence, patience, and quiet observation had guided her to this moment. And now the hidden connection she carried was being reverenced. Sealed in full, undeniable clarity, the master, grappling with the enormity of the revelation, began to reconsider his own role on the plantation. For years, he had viewed labor, ownership, and hierarchy as absolute, unquestionable. Yet the presence of this girl, with her hidden connection, challenged those assumptions. He recognized that true power was not merely derived from control or wealth, but from understanding, knowledge, and the ability to recognize value where others saw none. He had overlooked her once, dismissing her as a mere child sold for 19 cents, yet now he understood the profound error of that assumption. Word of the girl's intelligence and insight began to spread quietly among the workers, though the full extent of her lineage remained a closely guarded secret. She moved among them with calm authority, her actions guided by understanding rather than domination. Even the older workers, who had long navigated the harsh realities of plantation life, could sense that she was different. They respected her, sometimes with awe, sometimes with cautious curiosity, and they began to recognize that her presence carried weight that transcended ordinary hierarchies. The master, meanwhile, took steps to protect the girl and her secret. He understood that revelation carried both opportunity and danger. There were neighbors, rival plantation owners, and local authorities who might not recognize the legitimacy of her claims and who could act to suppress or exploit her if they discovered the truth prematurely. He devised a careful strategy, a plan to secure the girl's rights, protect her position, and navigate the social complexities that lay ahead. It was a delicate balance, requiring foresight, diplomacy, and the careful management of perception. As the hidden connection became clearer, the girl began to assert her influence in subtle ways. She advised on the management of resources, suggested improvements to the organization of labor, and mediated conflicts with wisdom that impressed both the master and the overseers. Her guidance was never overtly authoritative. It was quiet, intelligent, and invariably effective. Those around her began to recognize that her insight was invaluable, even if they could not yet comprehend the full extent of her significance. The estate itself began to change under her influence. Efficiency improved, morale shifted, and a new order began to take shape, one that balanced labor with understanding, authority with intelligence, and tradition with foresight. The hidden connection she carried was no longer an abstract concept. It had tangible consequences, shaping the lives of everyone on the plantation in ways both subtle and profound. And yet, despite the growing recognition of her significance, the girl remained humble, patient, and calculated. She understood that revelation was a process, that influence must be cultivated carefully, and that timing was everything. Her hidden connection, once obscured, as now being integrated into the world around her, reshaping relationships, hierarchies, and perceptions. She had survived the cruelty of a system designed to erase her, and now she was poised to assert her rightful place within it. The master, reflecting on the journey, could hardly believe the transformation. What had begun as a simple, almost laughable purchase for 19 cents had evolved into the discovery of a hidden lineage, a reclamation of history, and a profound lesson in perception, value, and human potential. The girl, once overlooked, had revealed herself to be not merely a worker, but a living connection to a past that demanded recognition and respect. In her presence, the master learned that the world was far richer, more complex, and more mysterious than he had ever imagined. As the evening shadows deepened, stretching across the study and the plantation grounds, the master looked at the girl with a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. He realized that he was no longer merely an observer of her abilities. He was a participant in a story far larger than himself. The hidden connection had been revealed, and with it, the boundaries of power, inheritance, and understanding had shifted irrevocably. What had begun as a transaction had become a revelation, one that would leave an indelible mark on the plantation, its inhabitants, and the history that had long sought to erase her. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls like echoes of the past. In that light, the girl stood poised, a figure of resilience, intelligence, and quiet authority. Her hidden connection, once obscured by time, circumstance, and human neglect, was now clear, undeniable, and transformative. The stage was set for the consequences, the ripples that would spread far beyond the fields, the quarters, and the estate itself, reshaping lives and legacies in ways that no one could have foreseen. The morning sun rose over the plantation in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the fields, yet the atmosphere had shifted. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible tension in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that the world on the estate was no longer the same. The girl moved among the laborers as she always had, her steps measured, her gaze observant, yet there was now a new weight in her presence. She carried herself not only with the intelligence and grace that had always set her apart, but with the knowledge of her lineage, the hidden connection that had been unveiled, and the power that awareness granted her. The master, too, felt the transformation. He had spent countless hours reviewing records, verifying documents, and considering the implications of what he had discovered. The realization that the girl was a rightful heir to a lineage of influence and property had fundamentally altered the way he viewed the plantation, its workers, and the legacy he thought he controlled. Authority, he now understood, was not simply the enforcement of rules or the accumulation of wealth. It was the recognition of value, often hidden, sometimes overlooked, and occasionally disguised as a child sold for 19 cents at an auction. The impact of the revelation rippled through the estate quietly but inexorably. The overseers, once confident in their absolute control, found themselves navigating a new hierarchy they could not fully understand. The laborers, aware of the girl's intelligence and her unique standing with the master, treated her with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and cautious deference. It was not overt authority she wielded, but influence, the kind born of knowledge, foresight, and the quiet power of truth. Her hidden connection had elevated her position in ways that no hierarchy or tradition could have predicted. The master began to make deliberate changes to the estate in recognition of the girl's significance. He ensured that her safety was prioritized, that her movements and decisions were respected, and that she had access to the records and histories necessary to reclaim what was rightfully hers. There was a new order emerging, one that balanced labor with recognition, obedience with understanding, and authority with intelligence. The plantation, once a rigid microcosm of exploitation and hierarchy, began to take on a subtle, evolving structure shaped by the girl's insight and the master's newfound awareness. One day, as she walked through the fields, the laborers could see the transformation taking shape. They observed her offering guidance, suggesting improvements, and mediating disputes, not with the heavy hand of a master, but with the precision of someone who understood human behavior, timing, and consequence. Conflicts that once escalated into harsh punishment or inefficiency were now resolved with subtle interventions, careful words, and the quiet authority that came from knowledge rather than fear. It was a shift so profound that even those who had lived long years under oppression sensed it, their routines subtly adjusting to accommodate a new reality. The master, reflecting on the chain of events, could hardly believe the irony. 19 cents, the amount he had spent to acquire this child, had become the most consequential investment of his life. In a single transaction, he had obtained not only a laborer, but a living bridge to history, a mind capable of insight, and a presence that would forever alter the social and economic fabric of his estate. He marveled at the improbable alignment of events, a child overlooked by others, purchased cheaply, now holding within her the key to influence, understanding, and the reclamation of a legacy that had been almost erased from memory. The girl's hidden connection was no longer a secret confined to the study or whispered among the ledgers. It began to manifest in practical ways that affected everyone on the plantation. Land records were carefully revised, ancestral claims acknowledged, and disputed properties identified for proper restitution. The master ensured that the girl's family history was recognized where possible, and that she had a legitimate claim to inheritance previously denied to her. The workers observed the changes with a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism, sensing that justice, however delayed and subtle, was quietly unfolding before their eyes. As the weeks and months passed, the girl's influence extended beyond the immediate plantation. Letters and messages were sent to neighboring estates, officials, and distant relatives to establish her legitimacy. The master, once solely concerned with his own wealth and power, became an unlikely advocate for her recognition, facilitating a process that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. The girl's intelligence, foresight, and composure were instrumental in navigating the social and bureaucratic challenges that arose. Her hidden connection, once buried beneath layers of history, now became the foundation for action, accountability, and restitution. There were moments of resistance, as might have been expected. Some neighbors questioned the authenticity of her claims, some dismissed her lineage as irrelevant, and others feared the disruption of established hierarchies. Yet the girl navigated these challenges with remarkable poise, using evidence, logic, and an unshakable calm to assert her position. The master, increasingly aware of her extraordinary capabilities, provided support without overshadowing her voice, recognizing that her rightful place could only be claimed through her own agency. Within the plantation itself, the social dynamic transformed. Workers began to see her as both a figure of guidance and a symbol of resilience. Children who had once feared the harshness of the estate now observed her as a model of intelligence, courage, and perseverance. Even the older workers, whose lives had been shaped by labor and subjugation, acknowledged the subtle power she wielded, not through brute force but through knowledge, understanding, and the quiet reclamation of what had been denied. The master, in private moments, reflected on the lessons the girl had taught him. He understood that true value often lay hidden, that appearances could deceive, and that intelligence, lineage, and insight could not be measured in monetary terms. 19 cents had purchased a child, yes, but in reality it had brought him far more than he had ever anticipated, a living testament to resilience, a bridge to forgotten history, and a reminder that human worth could never be quantified by price alone. The girl herself was evolving as well. With each passing day she grew more confident, not in arrogance but in the certainty of her rightful place. She understood the power of her hidden connection, and she wielded it with care, patience, and wisdom. She influenced decisions, guided actions, and shaped the estate's operations, yet she never allowed her authority to overshadow the humanity of those around her. Her presence became a quiet force of change, demonstrating that knowledge and lineage, when combined with intelligence and restraint, could alter the course of lives, communities, and history itself. As the plantation adjusted to this new reality, the wider implications became apparent. The girl's claims prompted discussions among neighboring estates, legal authorities, and distant families about inheritance, property, and social responsibility. The master, once a man of singular focus on his own wealth, now became a participant in a larger process of recognition and justice. Letters were exchanged, legal documents verified, and once obscured histories brought into the light. The girl's hidden connection, once a private truth, now became a catalyst for broader acknowledgement and reparation. The workers, observing these transformations, experienced a sense of hope and possibility. They witnessed that knowledge, intelligence, and patience could achieve what brute strength and authority often could not. They saw a child, purchased for less than the price of bread, assert influence that reached beyond the boundaries of labor and fear. It was a subtle yet profound lesson, one that reshaped expectations, inspired courage, and demonstrated that resilience and wisdom could overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The master, reflecting on the full arc of events, recognized that the story of the girl was inseparable from the story of the plantation itself. He had entered into a transaction expecting simplicity, yet he had emerged as a witness to a revelation of hidden history, power, and agency. The girl's presence transformed the estate, not through confrontation or rebellion, but through the quiet assertion of truth, intelligence, and rightful inheritance. The consequences were both immediate and long-lasting, altering not only relationships and hierarchies, but also the moral and social landscape of the plantation. In time, the girl assumed a role that was both respected and influential. She advised on management, facilitated equitable resolutions, and became a living symbol of reclaimed history and enduring intelligence. Her hidden connection, once a secret, had been revealed, and with it came the responsibility to guide, influence, and ensure that the lessons of the past were neither forgotten nor ignored. The master, acknowledging the depth of her impact, supported her quietly, recognizing that her journey, her reclamation, and her authority were as transformative for him as they were for the estate and its inhabitants. And so, life on the plantation entered a new era. The fields still required labor, the quarters still needed tending, and the routines of daily work persisted, but beneath the surface everything had changed. The hidden connection of one child, overlooked and undervalued, had reshaped relationships, hierarchies, and perceptions. The estate was no longer simply a place of labor and ownership. It had become a place of recognition, justice, and the quiet assertion of human potential. The master often reflected on the improbability of the events that had unfolded. 19 cents, the cost of a child in an auction, had become the foundation for profound revelation, transformation, and the reclamation of history. He understood, now more than ever, that worth could not be measured in currency, that power could reside in subtlety and intelligence, and that the most unassuming presence could carry a legacy capable of reshaping lives. As the sun set on the plantation, casting long, flickering shadows across the fields and buildings, the girl walked through the estate with calm assurance. She had survived the cruelty of circumstance, navigated the complexities of oppression, and unveiled a hidden connection that had changed the course of her life and the lives of everyone around her. She was a living testament to resilience, intelligence, and the enduring power of truth, a reminder that even in a world structured to diminish value, extraordinary potential could emerge from the most unlikely beginnings. The plantation, once a symbol of labor, hierarchy and control, had been irrevocably transformed. The hidden connection of one child had set in motion changes that would echo across generations, altering inheritance, authority and perception in ways that could not be undone. And while daily life continued with its routines and demands, the presence of the girl, the recognition of her lineage, and the acknowledgement of her intelligence ensured that the estate and all who lived within it would never again view the world in quite the same way. The story of the 19-cent purchase, once a simple transaction, had become a legend in its own right. It was a tale of hidden history, resilience, and the extraordinary impact of intelligence and lineage. The girl, whose quiet determination had revealed a hidden connection, had claimed her place in the world not through force or fear, but through knowledge, patience, and the subtle assertion of truth. The master, once a man who measured value in currency and labor, had learned that the most profound legacies were those that could not be bought, only discovered. And as night fell over the plantation, the wind carrying the scent of cotton, earth, and distant rivers, there was a sense of enduring possibility. The hidden connection had been revealed, the past had been acknowledged, and the future had been irrevocably reshaped. The girl, once a silent observer of a harsh world, now stood at its center, a living bridge between history and the present, a reminder that even the most overlooked presence could transform everything.